Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. On today's episode, Moshe and I are excited to be speaking with a leader in the product community, Aakash Gupta. Aakash is well known for his product growth newsletter and podcast. Today, we'll be discussing some of the product analytic players on the market and how they impact product growth. So let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Aakash.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. It's our pleasure. Hey, Moshe.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Aakash. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And you are joining us from USA, right?
Yes, Durham, North Carolina. Probably most well known in the product management community for being the home of Pendo, the product management tool we'll talk a little bit about.
Right.
But otherwise, kind of sleepy part of the country.
Okay, as long as there are good things coming for product people, then we don't care where they come from. Right?
And it's not too far from Atlanta, so I got another USA guest call, so that's great.
We have a bit of like a count between Matt and I, like the number of visitors, guests to our show that are coming from Canada versus the US. So
yeah, Moshe's got me beat by quite a bit, so I'm happy to have another fellow American on the show. So that's good.
we just have to talk here.
Yeah, that's right.
We invited you to the show because we saw one of your posts on LinkedIn that really triggered us, because we talk about products for product people, right? So every time that we see something about the product that our community is using, we're like, our eyes popped out, and we have to talk about this thing. And this post was about a research that you did with different product analytics products to see where they are, what's the leaders, the challengers, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of great stuff in there. We will share the link to that post with the description of the episode, but we wanted to dive in with you a bit. So first of all, before we start all of that, let's hear from you about your background. How did you get into product management?
Oh, wow. Rewinding to 2006, 2007. So basically, I was lucky enough that my dad was a professor of computer science. And so he got me into coding from an early age. He put me into like the middle school coding competitions. Throughout high school, I was like basically a competitive coder, like spending weekends at different places, doing tournaments. So by the time I got to college, I was pretty good at, building websites, building apps. In 2008, what was the big new platform? Obviously, it was iOS. So I was building lots of iOS apps and different things like that. Along the way, on the website side, I was consulting for a company that was local to the University of Michigan where I went, which was called Scoutforce. And what they had built was a SaaS application for college sports teams. So if you imagine University of Michigan football, they have like 15 people on their recruiting staff, at least back in 2008. I think it's probably actually more now since they won the national championship, but back then. And they just got enabled by the iPhone to be able to, like, for instance, take the notes of when they just met a recruit out in Arkansas or out in Texas and share that back immediately with the rest of their team. And so there was this huge, like, everybody knew it. They all wanted a product like this, but there was no such a product. And so that's what Scoutforce did. It helped recruiting teams, put everything that they were learning about candidates in the cloud. You could think of it as like a candidate CRM for recruiting teams. And so that was very successful. We expanded to over 40% of D1 companies. And I was actually working for them in more of a developer designer capacity when I started, because it was a small startup. It was like, 12 people, I think, at the time. So I was doing everything. So one of the interesting things was they handed me like their website redesign project, like redesign the whole app, the whole logged out website. But interestingly, like they didn't give me like any direction. They're just like, do it. Like, we trust you to do it. So I had to do all the product stuff, like ask, like, what do our users want? What are the business objectives we want to pursue? What technically can we do, right? Just that classic Venn diagram of what product management is.
Yeah.
So I started doing more and more of the product management work. Ultimately, all of my work became product management. They hired me full-time after I graduated from school. And that was I was one of those few lucky people who actually got a product manager job right out of undergrad,
Mm,
and I worked on that for a while. So that was how I got into product.
mm,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, it is one of those things I'm hearing from a lot of people. I also got into product management the same way from software development. It took me only 20 years, but a bit longer. But I also never had a product manager on my team, never have designers on my team. Had to do all of that myself. My products sometimes look like crap, but that was back in the day that everything looked like crap, so no one cared. So it's it's a very natural way, and I think it still works these days also. So if you're a developer in the early stages of your career and you're very curious about product management, just start working for a startup and do that work. As simple as that.
You get your hands involved in a lot of different things, right?
Yeah, definitely the easiest path in. The world where it's really hard to break in right now. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
best.
yeah, absolutely. So back then, did you have any product analytics products, or there was nothing there, right?
Yeah, we did hook up our SQL databases to Tableau. So I
Mhm.
think that was like considered state of the art back then.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
Hooking up to a BI tool, like I remember just convincing them to pay Tableau because it was so expensive, was like
Yeah.
an entire effort.
Yeah.
But we got a huge ROI out of it, just literally having a live dashboard. At the time, like there wasn't really even like a GA that could like truly service what we were looking for. So just having a basic dashboard, this is how many logged out users, this is how many logged in users from a particular account, how many users they're paying for X many seats, how many seats are actually getting used. Those basic dashboards were
Yeah.
game changers.
Yeah.
That's
But
great
then,
insight even back in the early 2000s like that.
Yeah. I think Google Analytics might have existed, but
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to say. So back then probably Google Analytics was the
Was
first
it, right?
that did a bit more than just that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what was your experience, your first experience with the product analytics, real product analytics product?
Way later, like maybe like 15 years later. So it just happens to be at the type of companies that I worked at, I think. So I worked at like for instance, like ThreadUp. I did a startup after Scout Force, then I worked at ThreadUp. It's a public company now. When I was there, it was Series C. I was there from Series C to Series E. So there we actually used Looker. So again, like a BI tool that we hooked into SQL. And I was infamous for just spending most of my time in SQL anyways, because I was very comfortable with SQL. So that's how I approached it at ThreadUp. Then I had a stint at Google. There they have internal product analytics tool that they use. Especially I was within Google Cloud. So most of the Google Cloud products use this like internal tool that they have. So that was probably the real first exposure. Then I worked at Epic Games. Epic Games did not have a product analytics tool. Again, it was SQL, Tableau, but we also had Snowflake. So once we got Snowflake, that was like a game changer because the SQL started executing like 100 times faster. So that was huge. We also had a tool called Grafana, which mainly developers used, but because like the ratio at Epic Games is like 10 PMs to like 2,000 developers, like you had a lot of developer driven dashboards within Grafana. So really, a long story, I finally got into like a classical product analytics tool when I was at a firm. So that was when I first got exposed to this modern class of like Amplitude and these types of really, really powerful product analytics tools.
Yeah. I still remember the day that I saw Pendo for the first time in a conference here in Toronto, in a product camp in Toronto. And it blew my mind. I'm like, we can do that as product people. Like, give it to me. Give it to
Yep.
me. Took me a year to convince my company that we need to pay for it, or they need to pay for it. But once I started using it, I couldn't really go back.
Yeah, I remember at that time period, like just Pendo's like value proposition of will like record all your events. You can like retroactively go in. That was like a huge selling point.
That was a huge selling point.
Mhm.
As well as for me anyway, and we learned that throughout the episodes we did on product analytics on the podcast, which was actually our first series that we did over three years ago. So they grew
Yeah.
a lot since these products. but we learned a few things in there that differentiate those products. And one of the main things that to me anyway stood out, and it's still until these days, is the need on one hand for developers to be part of the loop to raise all the events in the product,
Mhm.
so the analytics can capture that, versus the WYSIWYG type of product that you as a product manager can define all the elements and features that you want to capture.
Yeah. Yeah. They like basically like a modern PM using these types of tools doesn't even understand like the basics of telemetry that we grew up on, where in your PRD, you have to define every single event you want your engineers to send to the data router, or come review time, it won't be there.
Yes, exactly. And just like you said before with Pendo, being able to go back to day one, that was always like such a winning point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not here to promote any of those products. We always say we're not promoting specifically any product. We want to speak more about the industry and what you found through that research that you did. So tell us a bit how you went by to do the research.
Yeah, so I already had a pretty good idea of the product analytics market, like where I thought the player sat myself. So at Apollo, for instance, I was involved in our product analytics procurement decision. So I had done a little bit of that myself as a VP of product. And when I had done that, what I was most struck by was there was no report. Like any other tool you buy in tech, there's like a very good Forrester, G2, Gartner, probably all three have written a report on each market. Product analytics is like this many billions of dollar ARR market where there wasn't such a report. And I always really valued those reports. I know people tend to hate on those reports, but especially the Gartner ones, like I really liked those reports as a leader trying to figure out which tool I should buy. So I wanted to replicate the Gartner experience. So I spent 3 months. What I ended up doing was talking to 25 buyers of product analytics solutions. So I found like VPs of product like myself who had a pretty good idea of the different players, who could say like, off the top of their head, this is the difference between Heap and Pendo. This is the difference between Amplitude and Mixpanel, right? So I had them rate for me on the basic Gartner dimensions that everybody's super familiar with. So the like completeness of vision and ability to execute. So I had them rate on those. Then I did some more research on ARR and different things like that. I also talked to the VPs of product at what ended up being, after those 25 companies, the top four players: Amplitude, Mixpanel, Heap, and Pendo. So I
Mhm.
talked to their VPs of products in 30-minute chats. And then I talked to some of their ICPMs as well, who are like more focused on the analytics product. So that was kind of my research process for this piece.
When we had our product analytics series, those are definitely the ones we hit on. So I'm curious what you found from them in terms of, they all do product analytics. They've all grown up in this space. We've talked to other guests about how product analytics has taken on new forms. They've taken on like user research, other elements of the product. So I'm curious in your research whether you found what were some key differentiators.
So we were just talking about like the always on sort of like tracking of events. That's one philosophy within product analytics.
Mhm.
Actually, your amplitudes of the world, they're pretty much on the opposite end of the spectrum. And Amplitude ultimately came out like the leader in terms of completeness of vision and ability to execute. So Amplitude's idea is like, you don't want to just collect all this because you'll get a bunch of garbage data. It'll cost them a bunch of money to collect so much events. They still want like the classic telemetry approach. Like you're defining what telemetry you want to send to the data router. You have a really strong data dictionary. And their entire idea is like, with this WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. For PMs, you don't want PMs to use the wrong data field. That's what the old world of SQL, Tableau, and Looker looked like. In Amplitude, let's have this new world that like, if they're trying to query monthly active users, there is like a clear event, clear definition for monthly active users. And so Amplitude is more on that side. And if you look at just like the companies, the top four that I mentioned, Amplitude, Mixpanel, Heap, and Pendo, Amplitude, Mixpanel, and Heap are like pure play product analytics tools. Pendo is a PM platform. So they add in, for instance, they're actually a lot of times companies who buy Pendo, what I learned is they're buying them for things like their in-app guides. So
Mm.
it's really like the combination of all the things that Pendo provides. Pendo's like a full focused platform. So what that means is like, the entire company of Pendo is not focused on product analytics.
Yeah.
Versus like these entire companies are focused on product analytics. And what I found is like Amplitude is kind of like the power user sort of tool. Like you can just do all of the powerful stuff as a PM. Mixpanel is like the user-friendly tool that you can like, it's so user-friendly. And then Heap is like this interesting sort of mix where they do have the basic stuff you might expect. Like they have automatic event capture, kind of like Pendo, but then they also have the defined events like Amplitude. So they try to play in both spaces. And then, of course, there's all these new players too that I wanted to study. Like if you go talk to a lot of startups like me, everybody wants to use PostHog. So I wanted to learn about PostHog. Then there's StatSig. StatSig's a rapidly growing company. Interestingly, Heap was acquired by Content Square, who owns Hotjar. And all of these analytics companies these days are releasing like heat maps and session replays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Heap kind of has that with combined companies. And then, of course, there's the big dogs within analytics, like Adobe and Google. If you look at ARR, they still have the most ARR in the space. So I wanted to get that kind of full picture of everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Interesting enough, our last series that we just finished a couple of episodes ago was about session replay. And we didn't include any of those companies only because they didn't start from session replay. They started somewhere else. But we did include PostHog because PostHog was actually the first open source product that we featured in over 3 years that we have the podcast. So it's a very interesting direction that it goes, but even there we learned it's really aimed at developers and not so much at product people, because it's coming from developers.
Developer first company. Interestingly, PostHog has this reputation of being open source, but it doesn't have a self-hosted option. So
Mm.
it's still like
Mhm.
a finished product that you pay for.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Some of the points that you mentioned over there also resonate. The reason I chose Pendo in the first time wasn't really for the product analytics. I wanted the in-app messaging because I needed a way to connect with my users that I didn't have permission from people in my company to do that. So I wanted to go around them, and that was my way in. And then I learned that they really started their company from product analytics. And then I saw what they can do with product analytics. And I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, I really want that too. And then the second thing is that as a product person, writing stories and having backlogs and hearing from developers how long it will take to do things and prioritize them, I wanted to get off their, work, off their backlog, everything that was not focused on the value I'm creating with the product. And, adding, new, yes, it will create eventually value because I will know what's going on with the product and how people are using it. But it was an indirect rather than direct, this is a feature I want them to develop. So I didn't really want them to waste time on that. I want them then to so that's why I love this approach that I can define whatever I want in the WYSIWYG, and why I always opted towards products more like this rather than Amplitude. I never actually used Amplitude, although I've heard a lot about it. I know people are
Yeah, I
swear by
haven't
it.
either.
And yeah, but I always opted for that one that will leave my developers alone. Let them do the value that we need to do for the company.
Yeah, it's often a question of resources and what type of company you are too. So like the digital native companies, they prefer to buy like best in class tools in each category. So instead of having like 80% quality tool for product analytics, they'll prefer to buy like the very best. Same for like in-app guides. Maybe they'll go to WalkMe. And then for in-app surveys, maybe they'll go to Sprig. And for putting AI on top of all these channels, maybe they'll go to Interpret. So they'll buy like 4 tools. The alternate option is to like buy one tool that does all of them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I guess that at that point I was one of the decision makers, or at least I was able to bias the decision makers to go my way. And therefore I was able to say, okay, this is really the product that I want here.
Yeah. I think it's great because it these tools have become democratized in terms of like people can use them, like product managers can use them, designers can use them. You don't need engineers to use them specifically. And in order to like start mapping something, you can get in there right away, start gaining insights. And then this plays into adoption metrics, features and stuff like that. So the barrier of entry into these products, I mean, I'm using Pendo currently where I'm at now. So I just like that about these tools. And I think all of them are pretty much geared towards that.
Not all of them are geared towards just empowering PMs and designers. So like if you think about your Amplitude, Mixpanel, StatSig, PostHog, Glassbox, LogRocket, Adobe Analytics, Woopra, all of these tools, even Quantum Metric, you're still going to have to define your telemetry and your PRD,
Mhm.
because they're all about the idea that you don't want unlimited data, kind of like Heap and Pendo, but that you just want like very clearly defined data. So they're actually still more in that model. But the
Okay.
thing is that they're making it so you don't have to deal with SQL. And SQL has like two problems. Like, first of all, going back to that core problem they're trying to solve of people having different definitions, in SQL, it's so easy with your window function to suddenly change what a particular variable means, or
Mm.
with your where grouping to suddenly change it. And very few people are actually good at subqueries and stuff like that to maintain the fidelity of the data they're querying. So that's one. And second, a lot of people are scared of code, right? They're scared of SQL. And it often you need to be pretty smart about like putting your limits. Like I want to limit 100 first to get the query to work. Then I want to limit to like yesterday to get a first chart. Now, if I really want to develop for time, then I'll look over 6 months. So a tool like Amplitude or Mixpanel will really help you like do all of that stuff in the background. So what you see is what you get. You're just focused on let me define the
Yeah.
variables in the chart. It's almost like using like a pivot table.
Yeah.
So that's where the value of those really comes in. It's like an advanced version of Excel connected to your product database.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense. But if you wanted to go deeper and if you were comfortable with SQL, you had the flexibility to do so, or does it just kind of remove that period?
Have like SQL querying built into them because
Okay.
again, they're very specialized and focused companies
Yeah.
and
Mm.
so you'll often see a customer will have like an amplitude and a mode or an amplitude and a snowflake or amplitude and Power BI, something to actually query SQL.
Exactly, yeah. We actually one of the things we did when we used Pendo, we injected all the data from Pendo into our data warehouse, and then we had Tableau, I believe. So our BI team were able to merge it with the other information we got from everywhere else. So it was just one data point. So that's how we did that.
Yeah, buyers often complain about revenue and money as
Mhm.
kind of the one area that these product analytics tools lack very much. Obviously, all the players will tell you that they've done a whole bunch to like get their integrations, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of the key word there is like you need to set up your tool really, really well. You need to get all the integrations. And if you don't have a clean data model at your company, especially your average B2B SaaS company, where is the source of truth for revenue? It's just in their CRM. It's just in Salesforce. There
Yeah,
is no like clean data model in their data warehouse for it. So then it can be problematic when you're hooking up to a product analytics tool.
absolutely. Yeah, we actually at that company we had a very advanced data analytics and BI team and vision. So that's why I was lucky to be able to do that over there. Now, you mentioned also in the post some niche products, and that's an interesting thing also because one of them, for example, is Full Story and LogRocket, which we featured also both of these in the session replay theme that we had recently. How did you approach that? What did you find about those niches?
So both of those companies have a slightly different story. So LogRocket's vision isn't as much about like marketing analytics, or advanced user segmentation. They're like about connecting user actions with technical errors. So it's like a pretty like specific sort of area that they're focused on. And they're focused on like kind of their real-time insights, and integrating like your front-end performance data with your user behavior. So it's like technical teams really, really like it. They have very powerful session replay, as you mentioned. They have really effective error reproduction, and then they have strong integration capabilities with the other things that like your tech team wants. So
Mhm.
it's like a more engineering led culture. They like super like LogRocket. LogRocket, where it can lack is kind of like some of the advanced analytics that you'll find in like a Amplitude or Heap for PM. So the biggest fan I found of LogRocket was like a senior front end developer. He was like, "This has been a lifesaver for our dev team." So
Mhm.
that's kind of the LogRocket story. Full story. So they're what we like call like the digital experience analytics space. So they're not like exactly product analytics. Like they have session replays, they have heat maps, they have funnel analysis. So what I found is that like your mid-market, your enterprise companies really like that it's like holistic digital experience analysis. And then
Mhm.
they also have this thing called like proactive issue detection. So they can help you like figure out like if there's UX issues. They have pretty good machine learning integration. They have nice search capabilities. They have really good data capture. Their interface was consistently called pretty intuitive.
Mhm.
The challenges for what I found for Full Story was around data volume management. So
Mhm.
they basically like try to capture everything, so that can lead to pretty high data storage costs for people. And then their advanced features, what I heard is that there's a pretty high learning curve. And for small customers, it's too expensive.
Mhm.
So like the person who I found who was like the biggest fan of Full Story was a VP of product at a very large SaaS company.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. This actually leads me maybe to the next question, which is the topic everyone is talking about in the last year or so, which is AI.
Hmm.
Because the data analytics or capturing the data up front is one thing, and putting SQL in the back and helping people without the need of SQL, that's the basics. But getting insights from the data and getting these products to actually tell you what you should do next or tell you where you should focus on next is really, I think, where they're trying to go to, or some of them are already there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at all of the VP of product chats, which are included in my article, like every single one of the VP of products wants to talk about that, whether it's Heap, Amplitude, Mixpanel, or Pendo, right? They're like, this is where our roadmap has been invested for the last 2 to 3 years. I think
Yeah.
they're doing a good job. Mixpanel released like Spark AI last year. So that's
Hmm.
like an assistant that enables natural language queries. So the whole idea is we can democratize data access even further. Because even the idea of using a pivot table, it's still quite a bit of data fluency required. So what if
Mm,
we can take what we've gotten from, the monumental leaps that were GPT-3 and GPT-4 and apply that
right.
to the way users query data? And I mean, we can all see the writing on the wall. That will, of course, be the future. I started in the days of SQL and querying the database. Eventually, people will just be talking to an LLM, right, in order to
Yeah.
improve all this. So I
Right.
think they have really set up the foundation for those LLMs to work, like
Mhm.
especially tools like Amplitude and Mixpanel, because of their focus on defining those variables well. The LLM can't really make a mistake
Right.
versus other tools. Obviously, Pendo, their big release this year also was like AI-driven assistant. So I think all the big tools are doing it. I think it's also worth talking about the smaller companies though, who focus on AI. So there's like AI-powered decision engines. So there's
Mhm.
companies that really focus on your decision automation. So like Data IQ, people might not have heard of them, but they provide end-to-end machine learning. So it's very interesting. Or Data Robot, they offer automated machine learning capabilities. Or even if you think about like a stat sig, they have like these bandit algorithms that will like automatically converge so that you don't have to be the one who says, okay, after this A/B test is done, this one won. They'll just slowly
Mhm.
allocate more and more volume to the winning one for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's where I see AI coming in and being the most impactful. Like, I come from an analytics background, and I've been in the analyst role, digging through data, looking at charts, looking at graphs, making dashboards, and trying to understand things. It's insightful, but it's not necessarily actionable. And so I think that's where AI comes into it and really drives the action. And then as long as you trust it, and to your point, like they have to be accurate, that's when it becomes impactful.
Yeah.
Because then you say, okay, this was an impactful change that AI drove me towards. Then I'll just keep going back to the well.
Yep. And like some of these A/B tests that we're talking about, like if we're talking about like $1 billion company and an A/B test that has like a $500 million impact, if you can converge to that $500 million solution a week or two earlier, 500 over 50 weeks in a year, that's like 10 to 20 million dollars in value that the tool delivered for you. So
Yeah.
it pays itself.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true. Well, the thing with AI is that there are really I think there are two areas that it probably should go into. You already mentioned the one that, I'm asking it a question like I would ask my BI person. So this way, rather than having the BI work for me to do that, I will just ask the AI, like, I need to find this information about whatever. But then there is also the predictive one that will already tell me without me asking.
Yes. The predictive one is pretty interesting. Obviously, everybody's investing in that. Even like your legacy players like Adobe are making a big investment in like, here's the predictive reports. Here's how everything is coming out. So there's probably not a single player that I looked at that isn't making, 30-40% of their product teams work on AI functionality.
Would you be able to predict, based on what you have seen, what the future is going to look like for these companies?
In terms of like where I expect this to go, I expect the specialized companies to continue to win. Like they fundamentally have like 400 or 500 people just focused on AI, on analytics, and 30-40% of the company, 200-300 people just focused on the AI implementation. Your full suite companies, maybe they have 400 or 500 people, they have 5 products in the suite, so they have 100 people on analytics, 30-40% of them on AI, so it's like 30-40 people. So 30-40 versus 200-300. My guess is like the 200-300 teams are going to continue to set and raise the bar. Where I expect like your average PM to benefit from this is like one, instead of having to really negotiate with Amplitude and Mixpanel, sometimes, even to develop, to look at, for instance, at Apollo, I wanted to look at how our enterprise users versus our mid-market users versus our SMB users are reacting to this new activation test. It's not like I can say it to you this fast, but it's not that quick to actually create that in Amplitude. And for me to have confidence that it's like correct, then I need to go check whether it's statistically significant, et cetera, et cetera. I think in the future, like as fast as it took me to say that, an AI will just come back and tell you, yep, you need to wait 1 more week. That experiment needs more volume in the enterprise segment because that's your smallest volume segment. Okay, perfect. So I'll come back and check in a week. And probably even more, it'll say, oh, do you want me to send you an email when it's significant? And I'll just summarize your entire feature results right up. I believe you specified the North Star metric was this, the secondary metrics were this, the input and output metrics were this was the guardrail. So I'll just write you a draft of that report. And, the feature results write up is like, outside of the PRD, it's kind of like a PM's bread and butter, right? So you can imagine like AI creating 80% of the first draft for you based on 1 or 2 natural language prompts. So I think that's like where the PM's life is going to be really improved is A/B testing. The second is like ad hoc querying. Like so many times, like, we're investigating our strategy. We want to understand what's the addressable market for this feature. How many people are eligible for another loan? So we want to quickly query that, right? We don't necessarily know like for instance, at a firm, I want to know by credit score, how many monthly active users do we have? How many of them are eligible for a loan? And what's their average loan amount? How I would have had to do that in the past is like, I wouldn't have even been able to use our product analytics tool. I would have had to go to the SQL database. So then I go to the SQL database and I'm like making sure I defined each of these columns correctly, making sure I have the right definition of monthly active user, making sure I have the right definition of what their credit score is. Turns out what credit they have available at a firm lives in like 55 different tables. So I need to join these 55 tables. I could get that table join wrong, right? In the future, it'll just be that one natural language prompt and boom, I've now gotten this entire exploratory data set that informs my strategy for the next half. So where I expect it to go is that more PMs will be using data because it'll be so much easier to get there. So more decisions will be data driven. And right now, being data driven is like an edge, I still believe. Like just testing most of your features is an edge. So I think in the future, it'll be less of an edge because everybody will be doing it. It'll be so much easier. And so that's kind of my prediction for the future.
Very nice. I like that. So a lot of us to look to in the future. And I think that probably, we've seen some of those players that are growing their capabilities and their products by acquisition of other companies. So probably that's what will continue happening, that they might acquire this team of, very focused AI scientists and data scientists that are building something really cool, and then they will add it to their team. So I'm not thinking their demise will come because they don't have enough developers right now, but they probably will have those strategies as well.
Yeah, I bet so. I mean, there's a lot of really, really specialized companies in this space that do like two or three things really well. SmartLook, LogRocket, Glassbox, Woopra, even PostHog probably falls in that category still. So all those companies I think are ripe for even maybe your legacy players. Like you can't count Adobe and Google out to purchase.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, your focus is on product growth, right? I believe that's your main focus. That's also what your podcast is about, and your everything you're writing about. How do you tie it? I mean, it's directly tied to those products, because in order to grow, you need to know to have a scene glass into your how you're doing. But tell us a bit more about that.
So whenever I was a head of product growth, I often was the voice for bringing in a product analytics tool. So that's why I was involved with the decision at Apollo. Even at Epic Games, I was like, we should buy one. Interestingly, like at Epic Games, they don't like make decisions. At least when I was there, I think things might have changed on like ROI. So for them, they were like, why? We were not deciding based on ROI. We're deciding based on what's cool, what the player base is going to be excited about. So I didn't
Yeah.
have success there. But in ROI driven companies, which is most of your growth roles, the product growth team needs to be the best user of the product analytics tool, in my personal opinion. That's what I always told the PMs on my team. You need to be the expert. There can't be a core PM who's better at using Amplitude than you. You should know the ins and outs of every event definition, every snafu, every chart type, everything, right? So your product growth team, they need to be really good at using the tool. They also need to be leaders in experimentation. They should be running the most experiments at the highest volume. They should be at the cutting edge of we graduated this experiment 4 days afterwards because we hit stat sig right away versus waiting for the drawn out 4 week process where they get the 17 VP reviews in order to roll out the feature. So they need to be like the shining beacon of data driven experimentation, both using the tools and using experiments. So that's why I feel like a product analytics tool, often when I talk to like VPs of product growth, the directors of product growth, one of their first plays in a new job is to take a look at the existing product analytics stack. And so that's where I really was motivated to create this article, because they're going to say, okay, we're on Adobe, guys. Like one of the first things I'm doing is I'm moving us to a modern tool. Let's do an RFP with the top 4 players from Akash's report and figure out who we want to use, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe a lot of people actually these days, they're like PostHog fans. So they just go to the next place and they implement PostHog there. Or there's also this growing cohort of StatSig fans where they just go and they implement StatSig. So what StatSig does is it basically brings you like how Facebook runs experiments. You can do that in your company. And as you guys may know, like Facebook runs hundreds of experiments a day. So one of the biggest problems people faced with existing tools like Optimizely or even Amplitude experiments is like deconflicting experiments. StatSig will just allow you to do that like super, super easily, even if you're running like 15 experiments on the same surface. Automatically does it in the background.
Mhm.
So for me, product growth, like the essence of product growth is being data driven and running a lot of experiments in the
Mhm.
most high leverage areas of the business, which means they're very crowded and there's lots of experiments already happening. So that's why I feel like a next level product analytics tool, every product growth leader should have that understanding of the space to be able to bring that perspective to their company.
Yeah. So it's a table
Su-
stakes really to have that.
That's super helpful. So when you are thinking about product growth and growing revenue, when you're thinking about that, and you're thinking about using a product analytic tool to do so, like what are maybe some key fundamentals that you might be or that you need to focus on first in order to get it right?
So like kind of like the basics of product growth, right? The very first thing is you need to set up a growth model. So this is like a convergence of whatever your core product team has created and what your strategic finance team has created. And you need to basically bridge the two models. Like you typically your core product team, like they're pretty good at connecting together your input and your output metrics, but they don't always create like a holistic model. Like, in a typical PLG company, let's take that model, for instance. These are my visitors. These are how many I converted to free users. This is how many I converted to paid users. This is how many retained. This is how many expanded. Kind of like that basic model. You need to have that. So you have that's the strategic finance version of it. And then you need to put all your product drivers in. Experiments on the homepage help us convert free to paid. Experiments on the checkout flow help us convert, more expansion. Experiments here and here. So you connect all of those. So that's a growth model. That's like step one. Step two is like figuring out what are the high leverage areas and how am I going to negotiate working within these areas. There's almost always going to be core product teams that own these areas. So am I just going to input feature ideas to them and they're going to take them? Then like as a product growth leader, you're kind of screwed. Like this has happened to me multiple times. All your best ideas just get taken by the core product team. So then you need to figure out like, what is your areas? Are you going to be a full stack guy that comes in and does the features that they don't want to do, which means they're inherently just going to get a bunch of B and C features? Or are you going to potentially carve out some spaces? So your best product growth leaders will often carve out spaces with their core product leaders. So for instance, the spaces I love to carve out: activation, expansion, pricing, and packaging. Those are like the three first that I like to look at. And so those are very, very powerful. Activation, your biggest driver of retention. Expansion, naturally getting more money out of each account. And pricing and packaging, one of the most woefully neglected areas in product teams overall. There's usually like a million product teams always making changes to the pricing and packaging, but nobody like holistically looking at, okay, these are all the changes you guys made last quarter. We need to refresh this plan type or this, or you guys have now added 17 items to the hero card for the enterprise plan. It's a list of 20 things. Let's figure out what the top 3 are in order to sell a buyer on the pricing page for that enterprise plan. So those are the 3 that I'd like to tend to focus on. Of course, like if you look at your average growth team, there's more than just 3 teams. There will be other teams, and those are often business specific. So at a firm, we were really interested in like re-engaging people because 80% of people came to our app via repayments. So taking people from repayments use case to buying use case. At Apollo, when I came in, they had launched like 7 new products, kind of like how we're talking about everybody launched session replays and everybody launched heat maps. In the sales tech space, everybody's launching conversational intelligence. Everybody's launching meeting scheduling. Everyone's launching round robin. So Apollo had done the same. When I came there, I was like, oh my gosh, people are totally confused. So we created an information architecture team. So what I mean to say is there's like a bucket of tried and true levers, and then there's a bucket of like business specific levers that you should find via your growth model. So that's why I started with the growth model.
Oh, that's excellent. Super helpful.
Yeah. Maybe I might have one other question, and I don't know if this is up your alley or not, but this is related to those product analytics products, but before the growth is starting, or like in the early stages of the organization. Because this is also, one of those things that is important from day one, I believe are important from day one. They're maybe easier to do than A/B testing. So A/B testing, it's a bit harder because you don't have enough users. But sometimes companies it's very hard for them to, shell the budget for it. Although some of those companies do have startup discounts or free number of users, up to a certain level. So startups can start and then maybe get them hooked up and continue with that. What did you find there?
Exactly. So there's like 2 big options you have. Option 1, Google Analytics, the free version. I know everybody hates GA4, especially us old heads who have been around and seen GA3 and GA2. Like GA3, it was better, right? Let's just all admit it, right? But GA4, it's free. Like I always tell people, like, start there. Like have your team develop a weekly business review cadence off of GA4. Get into the habit of looking at, for every feature you use, every new feature you launch, what percent of our active users adopt it? For every feature you have, let's look at what is the setup aha, and habit. Getting into those rhythms, even if you're not going to be able to do statistically significant A/B testing deep in the product, is useful. And even if you're a small company, you should do some A/B testing. Where can you do that? Usually your logged out homepage. Again, Google Analytics is pretty well suited for that use case as well. So use a free product like Google Analytics. And then as you get more advanced, as you as a business develop data-driven decision making as a muscle, consider the freemium version, like you said, of these great tools. Whether you want to use PostHog or Amplitude, doesn't really matter. They're all excellent tools because they're super powerful in their paid plans, but their free plans, like you mentioned, if you're under 100,000 visitors per month and stuff like that, they often have free versions because they're trying to bet on like you kind of instilling this in your culture. And once you exceed 100,000 visitors per month, you'll start paying them. And often that is the case, that happens. And so that's what I typically recommend for people is like start with free. Like, there are free versions of this, but it's good to have something instead of like just assuming like your PMs can query SQL. Like we're all PMs, right? We know like the PM doesn't need more responsibilities on their plate in today's world. In a post Marty Kagan world where we've put viability, usability, feasibility, everything on top of the PM's shoulders, when every PM's calendar 9 to 5 is triple booked. Like we don't need to toss SQL and data analytics and product analytics. Like, it's just another job on top of them. So I do highly recommend that people pick up a tool, whatever tool they'd like, and try to make that PM's job a little bit easier.
Especially that some of those companies might not even have a PM or will have just one PM.
Yeah.
So please do start training that muscle. I like that. Amazing. Where can people reach out to you if they want to learn more or, chat with you?
Yeah, well, you guys are here on a podcast, so please check out my podcast also, Product Growth Podcast. You can just find it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Then the Product Growth Newsletter, product-growth.com. And like you mentioned, LinkedIn, that's my main marketing channel. So you can also find me there.
Amazing.
Awesome. Aakash, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Moshe, always a pleasure. We'll talk to everybody next time. Take care. Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.